guys, Reverend Brian Akers here, ItsReallyReal.com, racial equity. I have the distinguished honor of having a good friend of mine who I met a few years back in Salt Lake City, Jeffon with me today. He is a public speaker. He is someone who speaks to the power of positivity, but also the importance of diversity and inclusivity in institution, organizations, and in just daily life. And so, Jeffon, thank you for being here. What do you want people to know about you? Tell my people what you want them to know about you, bro.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Man, it's really great to be able to chat with you here. I'm, as Brian said, Jeffon. Grew up in Salt Lake City. I didn't meet Brian when I was growing up, but at a CSL convention in Salt Lake City. Right. Yes. My mother was adopted from Scotland. My dad is African American. So growing up in Salt Lake City was this very unique dynamic where I was like in both worlds. And I found myself in this very unique middle ground where forced to navigate in not dark enough sometimes, not light enough other times. And just allowed me to see this full perspective of my particular experience. So yeah, by no means do I speak for any one group of people. My experiences are my own, but I think that they could be valuable in this conversation that we're having and the work that we're both doing.
Well, yeah, man, that's why I was excited to have you, is because, you know, when you get multiple perspectives, you just, for me, that's what it means to relate to each other as God, right? Is to be aware that every person that I add to the conversation that has a wildly different perspective is informing me an even greater measure of God's understanding and God's brilliance and God's input, right? So like when Spirit's moving through us, like I like having people with very particularly interesting stories and backgrounds because they provide a lens to view things through that definitely wouldn't be mine, right? And so I'm excited to have you here today. You know, the impetus behind having you here today is because, you know, for some folks, what I've noticed and realized is that being a Black person or a person of color, right? And I try not to use those interchangeably. I think there's a lot of political correctness like surrounding all that. When I talk about Black folks, I just talk about Black folks. And one of the things I've noticed about folks who tend to be of mixed race heritage like yourself is that regardless of whatever else is mixed in there, when you engage the world, you're engaging the world as a Black man. That's been my experience. And I'm wondering, what is your feeling about that? What is your experience around that been, you know, as a mixed race heritage human? Have you found yourself being perceived as Black, and is that more a part of your like instant identity when you meet people, or is it a non-starter? Like, am I full of shit, or like is that the view?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. So yeah, I mean, the color of my skin seems to dictate the way that people respond to me, and I began to realize that at a very young age, particularly where I grew up in Salt Lake, where there was just very few people who had any dark complexion of skin. And therefore I was kind of just, you know, I started interpreting and seeing the world through this particular lens. And as I got older, I began to internalize a lot of the ways that people either said things to me, the way that they did or didn't engage with me. And that just started to form my identity. So yeah, I am seen as a Black man. Most of the time people ask me like, are you Puerto Rican? They go through all of these various things and ask me what I am. But it's fascinating. And then I went to college in Seattle and the same experience. I definitely have profiled by the police and pulled over and whatnot, and said I had things on me that I didn't. And I was just kind of lumped into that. And I was around my dad. So I really started experiencing my other side of the family, because growing up I was predominantly with my mom's side of the family. And then interestingly enough, when I moved to Atlanta, being that my complexion isn't as dark, I started actually witnessing almost a unique opposite effect, where I began to have certain privilege than my friends who were darker than me when we would be in certain places. People would speak to me differently than they would speak to my friends at times. But when I was in a predominantly white environment, then I assumed the role of quote unquote inferior, you know, based upon the color of the skin. So it's really interesting, and it's like this unique dynamic. So I went from Salt Lake City experiencing what it's like to feel discrimination and prejudice and this indirect racism that I like to say. In Seattle, very much of the same. It's like this false progressive type of identity that people have, but you can still feel these underlying currents. And then in Atlanta, flipped it around, and yeah, I'll stop with Atlanta because then I went to North Dakota and Cali, and I think North Dakota, fascinating enough, North Dakota for myself, that was when I made this mental shift where I realized I don't have to be inferior based upon how other people see me. And that changed the game.
Yeah. How did it change the way you like thought about it, thought about yourself, thought about the racial dynamic in general? Like what was the real mind shift there?
I was no longer a victim. And my identity wasn't based upon what another person's opinion of me or a group of people's opinion of me was. I would get, like, it doesn't matter if the playing field was even or uneven. I realized within myself that I could step onto that field that everybody's on, but some of us are just starting in different places, and I could succeed regardless. I could really use what I feel to be my power and my gifts to connect with people in an authentic human way. And in doing so, that opened the doorway to a variety of organizations there, working with a variety of indigenous communities there. And I really just found myself like empowered, though there was this very interesting undercurrent that was swirling there, particularly.
Yeah, like how do you reconcile that? Like that whole experience of like, yes, I am a truly empowered human, and this dynamic of how other people see me doesn't affect me, and I live in an interdependent world where those judgments and biases and prejudices and that racism does have like real undeniable impact on me. Like how do you reconcile that?
Man, it is a inner journey. And my yeah, imagine that. It's really going within. No, it's fascinating. One of my mentors, he's 82 years old, was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, African-American man, graduated with his PhD from Berkeley in the 60s, was the first Black head of the chemistry department at the University of Utah. In the 80s, started his diversity and inclusion organization, which I'm affiliated with. And he always told me, it does not, I never saw myself as that I couldn't do it. I just realized, okay, as a Black man, I have to work smarter, work harder, and I can succeed in spite of the inequities. And that can't be taken from me. Of course, it can be difficult. Of course, there will be barriers. Of course, there'll be people who try to prevent me, or systems or institutions that try to prevent me from moving forward. But if I focus my attention on that external world and totally minimize or dismiss what's taking place within myself, then I'm a victim for life.
So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth, right? Like what I'm hearing is that there can be empowerment with acknowledgement of the fact that there are disparities of justice.
Definitely, yeah. Empowerment is the capacity to perform the way that we define it, the way that I define it. And that means within myself, there is unlimited potential, as we both know. Mm-hmm. But that does not dismiss or, totally ignore the fact that there are things in the external world that are totally preventing certain people from being able to excel. And a lot of people, it is very difficult to look within and say, oh, I can be empowered in spite of this. Imagine what would happen, Brian, if all of the Black folks suddenly embraced this sense of empowerment and said, wait, right where I'm at, I can build this community up similar to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I could build up of course, that was bombed. So that there's some things that were
I was going to say, yes.
And it's not saying that wouldn't happen again, maybe in a different way. But
and it's that yes and, right? It's that like, yes, first of all, I think it's important to just acknowledge that white supremacy is a white people problem that Black people suffer under, right? Yeah. And so like I hear a lot of centricity around like the trials and tribulations of Blackness, right? So when I listen to people talk about it, what I hear is, these poor Black folks, and look at what they're dealing with, and look at how terrible it is, and imagine what it would be like to be them, and all this kind of stuff. Whereas for me, what I try to center my attention on is white supremacy, which is Black people have lived in the face of all of those things that you're like, oh, it's so terrible, it's so bad. and have still managed to consistently succeed and consistently excel. And it's like when I talk to my, yeah, and they manage to in the face. So black folks don't need our help because we should pity black folks, because black folks don't need pity. Black folks, in my opinion, black folks are so empowered that they've managed for 400 years to live righteous and powerful, loving, compassionate, community-driven lives, even in the face of all that oppression. And so, you know, the other side of it is white folks then having to say, well, like, so then what do I focus on? Like, look at everything that's happening. Focus on whiteness and white supremacy and fixing that problem, because this isn't a black people's failing. This is a white people's failing.
So, Brian, I have a question for you, because I've asked a handful of people this. What does white supremacy mean from your perspective?
So for me, white supremacy is really about the insidious nature of cultural acceptance of dominance over other people and individual superiority based on the color of people's skin, right? So for me, white supremacy shows up in a myriad of different ways. And it's something that I have. It's something that I was born into. It's a burden that was placed on my shoulders that I didn't ask to have. And it's one that I've been dragging around this whole time. And so I don't want it to sound like what I'm saying is that I'm a victim of white supremacy to the degree that black folks suffer under white supremacy and all other races, and really white, male, patriarchal, heterosexual supremacy, if we're getting crazy, right? But just in this thing, right? Is that there is something that there is this accepted normality around the idea that my whiteness imbues me with a sense of normality as being, this is what normal is, and everyone is striving to be like this. And so it makes me feel like I'm always the expert on everything, because I've been taught my whole life that I am the baseline for all measurement, right? And for me, white supremacy is the use of that culture and the existence of that culture in order to exploit others and to exalt white people. And so for me, white supremacy is like, it's in the air that I breathe here in America. It's in the water that I drink. It's in the conversations I have. It's in the media that I consume. It's in everything. I can't escape it. So I view it a lot like the AA program, right? Which is that you know, just like an alcoholic would claim that they're always an alcoholic and they'll never not be an alcoholic. That's not to say that there's something soiled about their soul. It's to say, hey, this is an issue that I'm going to have to pay attention to and work on my entire life, right? And so white supremacy takes that same shape for me. That white supremacy is a thing I have plenty of growth edges. In fact, I'm going to do a video here sometime in the future about like what my current white supremacist growth edges are, so that people can see that like I'm not some self-righteous white dude. But ultimately for me, white supremacy is really about recognizing how I grew up in poverty my whole life. I grew up with a single parent who is a schizophrenic, untreated, unmedicated, undiagnosed schizophrenic for the first half of my life. And so I've got a lot of strife and struggle and poverty that came through that. And yet the people that I was around and the black folks that I was experiencing that with, they're still back in those neighborhoods and I'm here. And so I have to acknowledge that. So for me, that's white. That's a lot of like what white supremacy means to me.
That's a really great perspective.
Thanks, man. Well, and I feel like also what happens is, and so just to preface, this is ItsReallyReal.com, which means we don't gotta fucking give a damn about how anybody else thinks about the way we communicate in this bitch. So I wanna totally free you to the idea that you have my unceasing support, and I will show up every single time if anyone chooses to combat you or to shout you down because they want to tone police you or say that you have to talk about it a certain way.
Yeah.
Because I like to try and create spaces where black folks can just get down and be authentic and honest without having to worry about the retribution and that kind of stuff. And so I'm doing my best to do that. So hopefully I can do that here with you.
Yeah, man.
But for me, like I'm wondering, you know, when I think about white supremacy and how I encounter it in the world, like where it shows up and how I deal with it, one of the things that I'm noticing is that a lot of folks are willing to prioritize the feelings of the racist people and the white supremacists above the imperative of holding them accountable to their internalized racism. And so what I find is if I show up, you know, and I have had a couple of conversations in recent days with spiritual leaders, colleagues of mine, who've made blatantly publicly racist statements that they don't realize are racist. And then I come and I absolutely attack that racist statement. Like I absolutely confront it completely. And then what happens is that there's this ocean of people that come to defend the racist. Like this huge tidal wave of people that come to defend the person who said this racist thing because they don't like my language. They don't think I'm being too aggressive. They think I'm an asshole. I'm not being kind enough. Right. And so for me, it's like, well, when they disappear and they hide from me and they don't have to face me, they're hiding behind a veil of white supremacy and white privilege. And I want them to know that that shit doesn't stop me. That just because you run away and hide behind this veil of white supremacy, white privilege, doesn't mean I'm not going to show up every single day and beat on that door and say like, hey, I know you're in there. You still haven't, you know, addressed this issue. You still haven't learned what you need to learn. You still haven't proven to the rest of us that you've learned the lesson of what was to be learned here. And so I'm going to persist in the face of that. So my question for you is, you know, you see so many people deal with this shit in so many different ways. What are your feelings about, like, how do you address avoidance and denial and defensiveness when white folks refuse to acknowledge their racism?
Man, that is, well, what you just said right there, it's like somebody says something that is blatantly racist to somebody who's willing to critically think about the statement that they said, right? And just
a nice way of saying, if you pay any fucking attention, that shit was some racist shit.
Exactly. And just because you don't think it's racist doesn't mean that it's not racist.
Right.
But then when this, like, it's almost like a fence appears of people who are defending and coddling that person, and that fence that is appearing that is preventing you from actually doing the work, or that person doing the work, is like this fence of white supremacy. That is like such a great analogy that you just shared there, man. I hope.
And it's like, and they want to tell me, well, you know, this person, this racist back here that you've harmed and that is really sad and upset about feeling bullied by you, you know, is not going to ever get the message, and you're never going to heal them. And I'm like, well, not with you standing in the way.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. You and you're actually, your support of that, which is fueling what that statement actually, you know.
Would you consider that racist? Is that racist to do that?
Well, you would think, because you're either going to create something that is entirely new, or your fact of supporting what that person said is reinforcing the status quo, which is adding your energy and power towards the current system, which we both know is systemic racism, oppression, and supremacy.
Well, and I will pressure you to answer, but in my response to that is absolutely. If you're someone who's defending the feelings of a white person who's upset about being called out for racism, you're being racist. Like, that's a racist act, in my opinion.
And I guess I went the long route to say the short answer, which is absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And like, don't ever feel like you have to answer any of my white man questions, bro.
No, it is. Well, going to that question that you asked, how do you address avoidance, denial, defensiveness when white folks refuse to acknowledge racism? It's kind of on varying degrees. If it's somebody who's close to me, because half of my family is white, and a handful of them are very willing to engage. But there are some who are unwilling to actually look and see. And they'll point, you know, if this, then that. You know, oh, well, what about this picture? And they'll like try to have me have to now defend what that picture is highlighting, a black person doing something bad. And it's like, but that doesn't dismiss the foundation that all of this is taking place on. So when people are avoiding, denial, defensive, honestly, Brian, like, it is so much work to even try to move one person, because it's always like this. I'm trying to share something, and then they'll come back at me. And then typically when they say something back to me, it's in a manner where I then have to defend what they're interpreting that I'm saying, which totally pushes me further away from the point that I was trying to articulate to begin with.
Well, and I feel like I've seen that happen to you publicly. Would you agree?
It happens all the time, man.
Right? Where it's like, okay, I'm making a point, and then the person that you're talking to isn't actually trying to have that conversation. They're trying to kind of use the person of color that's in front of them, or the anti-racist that's in front of them, and use them as a way to make their own points about what they think their views and opinions are around racism, rather than listening to someone who is either actually fucking black or listen to someone who's been doing the work and been reading the books and been having the conversations and building the relationships. They'd rather stick behind they'd rather use that opportunity, that conversation to defend themselves than to actually learn about the things that maybe they can't see.
Yeah, and honestly, I've been telling my little sister is also half Black. My youngest sister is not half Black, so her perspective is different, but has an experiential understanding based upon what she experienced us going through as she was very young, you know.
That's deep.
But really, I told my little sister, I'm like, I don't know if I even have the capacity to deal with it right now, and I don't want to engage, especially online. You know, perhaps if I'm sitting down with somebody, then I can have a conversation and there's more of that authentic interaction if they're willing to talk about deep stuff. But if this then that type of conversation, it's almost easier for me just to work on myself. Well, and people around me who are more ally type individuals, and we can create this synergy and this momentum forward versus, I don't know, man, it's a very unique thing.
Well, we've seen so many different styles of response from white folks right now, right? Like a bunch of white folks are just now realizing that this is what's going on, right? And then you got those white folks that have been doing the work for a long time, and they're out there like, I've been doing this all along, and you should see, man, I've been right. Like, and there's just like all these weird different like white responses to addressing folks who resist the basic premise, right? It's for me, if you haven't accepted the basic premise, I'm gonna bomb on you. I'm gonna bomb on you until you bend your knee and say like, wow, fuck, there is some shit here I don't understand, and I need to shut the fuck up and learn some stuff about this before I get engaged.
Brian, that's something that you have. You can do that.
Yeah.
Imagine me to some of the things that we've both seen online that people have posted that are just racist. You know what I mean? And like obvious, like white people are supreme, and let me show this in this way that I don't even know that I'm showing it. If myself or some of our other Black colleagues or friends went in like that, I mean, imagine the attack that would come down on them. Look at the attack that comes down on you. Yeah. But you recognize like, well, I'll still push forward because, I mean, why not? And there's other, you know, Black folks and people who would do that. But I think a lot of us, it's like, no, like for me, it's like, no, like I've tried to step out before and just bombarded. And it's like, then you don't want to, it's almost like it's a suppression of your voice. So now it's like, how can I begin to communicate in a way that is around people who want to do the work? And perhaps it's a fishbowl approach like we're having, and people can look in, and then there's some seeds that could be planted. Or, as I said a little bit earlier, having those authentic interactions with people who are actually willing to go through the uncomfortable feeling of it all.
So just remember, you don't ever have to ask any of the questions that I ask you. Answer any of the questions I ask you.
I like answering them, and it's all good.
What is it like for you to watch me go ham on motherfuckers around this kind of?
Okay. So honestly, so my wife is half Native, half Black, and we are always looking at, like, when you are going in on somebody, it's almost like this feeling of like joy, you know. And I'm like, even my wife, like, we'll be talking about, like, we literally have talked about numerous things, and she's like, let me see. And the way that you do it is, I personally like commend you, and I really appreciate it. And we've seen on some of the posts a handful of the other Black folks who chimed in, like, thank you, you know what I'm saying? And so for me, I'm just like, I love seeing that. And I just know, like, mentally I'm chiming in through the ethers, but not typing in, you know what I mean? But it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people when you do that, because they don't know how to handle it. And imagine then if a group of Black people were attacking that person, how they would feel. But you are willing to be a voice for, you're sharing your voice in a way that's like shaking their foundation, and you're not backing down. And you can see like a level of commitment and a willingness to go forward regardless of what backlash may come, because I believe from your perspective, the way you see it is, you're doing what we talk about, like
Well, and it's what they make me do. Like, if they were to practice these philosophies in a way that I could come and say, hey, look, and you've seen me do it. Hey, look, what you said here was racist. Here's exactly why it was racist. There's something for you to learn here, and here's some inspirational ideas around what we could do to get better. And their response is to act like a whiny little fucking soft in the ass, defending themselves and their virtue and their right. And it's like, look, I'm gonna give you another shot here. I'm gonna tell you that this isn't about you. This is about racism, and that we have to get this thing fixed, and that you can't be all fragile and frail while we get the job done. And if they continue to persist, and it's like that, what they're showing, in my opinion, is reflecting an unwillingness to change, and they're blaming it on other people and other stuff. And so then the rougher I get and the harder I go in and the more intense I get about like the way I address folks, is an escalation that their ignorance and their resistance kind of creates the space to have happen. And so I ask you that question, not because I need you to like, although I super appreciate you.
Let me pat you on the back.
Yeah, like I like, thanks, hold up.
Yeah, there you go.
And I appreciate it, right? But I'm not fishing for that. What I'm wanting to do is to check my own shit, right? Because if I'm out there doing harm, and these white folks really have their like really complicated ways of trying to convince me that I'm out doing white people harm by shaking them up and not being willing to accept their racist bullshit. And so like, I always like, here's a phrase that I've been saying a lot lately that's really interesting, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. What I've been saying is that I've spent my entire life being taught to seek the wrong people's favor. Right? I've spent my entire life being taught to chase the favor and the approval of white people. And so now I'm in this place where what I'm really doing, and no shame in my game, I want to pursue the favor of Black folks. Like, I want to feel like when Black folks look at me, that they see someone that they love and respect and value and think is doing good work in the world. And so I think there's a lot of real complicated dynamics in there, right? Because that joy that you described feeling, I wish you could be feeling that joy by being the one to go ham on these people, right? Like, I wish it's unjust.
I think I had like maybe 3 times, and then I'm just like, all right. Like,
right. So we've talked about a few of them, but like for you, and I'll share some of mine too, like, what are the biggest frustrations that you experience as you're trying to do this work of promoting racial equity and inclusivity and diversity in whether it's in organizations or institutions or cultures or systems or wherever it is?
One thing that is really frustrating is people thinking that it's a solely behavioral approach. That it's like, well, what are the behaviors that we can begin doing right now, without actually looking, well, what are the cognitive or internal things that I have to work on in order to shift the way that I show up in the world? Because new behaviors are very short-lived. There's no shortage of behaviors that people can do. But if the mindset and the attitude and the beliefs don't change, then it's going to, you have to do that inner work. So that's a huge one. Another one is probably the biggest frustration is an unwillingness to admit that there is systemic racism and oppression. Because it is very hard to budge somebody who's unwilling to recognize what is there, or unwilling to recognize a different perspective and a different experience from somebody who grew up on a different side of town. You know what I'm saying? And so, I mean, those two things, if we could recognize that the real work is not just what we show to the outside world, but what takes place within ourselves by dismantling our own Eurocentric, systemic, racist, white supremacy supporting ideas, beliefs, perspectives, and behaviors, all races, because we're in America. In order for me to thrive in the corporate world and with my business, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like I'm dealing with 90% white folks. Those are the people who write the checks.
Have you felt like you've had to just kind of accept intensely, I don't want to say demoralizing, but like intensely unjust circumstances in your professional life, because you're recognizing that you're up against a systemic racism that if you tried to resist it would be a huge threat to your career?
Honestly, not in the speaking that I do. Just because there's this level of transformation that is brought when we're able to do it. And when it's done, I mean, it's all across the board. So there might be one or two people who don't really want to be there, but for the vast majority, like, it's really impactful. So I would say no. I think the biggest thing is my own mindset, that will make me feel as if I am inferior or don't belong. And that is something that I created within myself by way of internalizing my experiences growing up, particularly ones where I was placed at a disadvantage, and that built into my identity. So it really starts with like the way that I see me. And it's not saying that I'll get the same shake with, Brad Smith from down the road, and he's a, 50-year-old white guy who's been doing it for a long time. It's just saying like, hey, like, there's a different way that I have to approach it. And there's this book that I've been listening to, The Obstacle is the Way, by Ryan Holiday, kind of based upon Stoic philosophies, which I would dare to say Stoicism didn't originate just from that area. There was African empires that were sharing that knowledge long before any Stoic. It's just they won't highlight them. Hence another reason, Eurocentrism and white supremacy. We maybe don't need to leave that in there, but that's a thought.
Well, no, like, I think that's important. Like, look, I think what we're talking about whenever we talk about racism isn't a miseducation, because that's how it's oftentimes framed, is that there's a miseducation, that we've been educated. That wasn't done on accident. Like, the people who have made the decisions about how to educate us, what to put in front of us, what to share with us, who to emphasize, where to put the focus, it has all been very conscious and deliberate. It's all been done on purpose. And so it's not a miseducation, it's a bad education. It's an incomplete.
That's a proper word.
And it's a white supremacist education. It's an education that absolutely centers every aspect of life around some virtuous white person who did a virtuous white thing and should be recognized as the person who should be given all of our attention and credit and accolades for that work. And so that's part of what is upsetting for me. That's one of my most frustrating things, is when I'm accused of being an egotist and an arrogant jerk so much, right?
Why is that, Brian? What's going on?
Yeah, what the fuck, man? And so it's interesting when I meet these folks who are like, hey, look, if you want me to change my mind about the racist thing that I'm claiming I totally already understand that you're asking me to change my opinion on because of the words that I just said, you're going to have to talk to me this way to get that done.
How does that make you feel, man?
Fuck you. Like, that's like, what that makes me feel is like, what you're saying is that you claim to have the understanding already, meaning you could already be changing your behavior and the way that you show up, but you would rather continue to go ahead and tell me to fuck myself because you don't like the way I'm talking about those things that you claim to already know that you're doing. Like, that's such a, like, that's got to be the apex of supremacy, to try and tell people who have done more work and spent more time in a particular field, well, if you really want me to listen to you, even though I already know what you're trying to teach me, you're going to have to talk to me this way or you're doing it wrong. And I get that so much. And I think in a world, and I've used this phrase and I use these examples just off the cuff, but they've been like the ones that I keep going to, which is like, in a world where Cardi B is a political pundit to millions of people, and where Fast and the Furious has 600 bajillion films where they've made billions and billions of dollars, there are a lot more of me out here, people talking this way, than there are people who are talking the way that a white supremacist New Thought individual might tell me I'm supposed to be talking about this stuff. And so, I hear these statements about a world that works for all, but then that world that works for all can't be a world that I'm welcome in because of the speech that I use and the language that I use. And that's like, how could it be a world that what you're actually saying without realizing it is that you want a world that works the way that you think it's supposed to work, which is a supremacist consciousness, which means that it's born out of supremacy. And it's not crazy to think that an American-born spiritual school of thought is going to be rife with unaddressed white supremacy. And so how do you feel about that idea? You deal with New Thought people so much. You deal with what has been described as the conspiracy of kindness. Like if you don't do it this kind way, then you're the asshole, and it doesn't matter what bullshit they did. It doesn't matter how much they've harmed or hurt people or perpetuated racism. If you talk to them this way, that makes you the bully and the asshole, and they deserve to be protected. What is your experience? That's my experience. What has your experience been of dealing with New Thought folk in this realm of work?
That's man, it's gonna be a total different perspective, because
I'm sure
I've found so I've had the chance to speak at probably like 60 or 70 centers all over, and started in Atlanta and then kind of branched out through the Southeast and then all just various places. And I found, like, when I go into most spiritual CSLs, New Thought communities, unity churches, there's maybe 2%, 3%, there might be one or two Black people, depending where, at some of them, there's a little more.
Sample size right there, I just want to say.
Yeah. There might be a few more. There might be a few more in other places where there's more of that Black population. But man, I've actually seen myself the way that I've been. Think based upon my experience, like I see myself as like this bridge builder, and I see myself as like somebody who can go in and deliver a message or workshop that is very impactful. It begins to allow people's guards to come down. I'm able then to interact with them in a way that I do. And in that authentic interaction, it's my hope that I can begin to invalidate unconscious perceptions that they had that were not based in any experiential reality. And in doing so, perhaps then I can start their own process, not directly, but kind of indirectly, for them to begin to work on perhaps some of the bias that they exist. Because, hey, I just saw this articulate young Black man. He was incredible. I mean, his message was great. I'm buying the CD or the copy of the sermon to give to my children and my you know what I mean? And so
Trump supporting cousin.
yeah. Maybe he'll listen finally, right? But I've seen myself as, it's like a very great opportunity for me to go into an environment that I have to say, like, fortunately, I feel very comfortable being in a room of all white folks, because I was raised with my grandparents and my mom. Like, that was my white side. Like, I feel very comfortable, and I feel very comfortable being in Black circles or any people of color circles. But I think that was something that was a blessing for me that at the time I saw as like a curse, because I was, going into Sunday school, and it's like no niggers allowed on the chalkboard, and the bishops and the leaders of the church that I was going to when I was young, didn't do anything. They would just say, like, well, just ignore it, or learning the Bible, and at that time the Book of Mormon, and it's saying like Cain slew Abel, and Cain then was painted black because of his sins. And anybody who is a descendant of Cain is tainted with the sin of that man. So if you have dark skin, then you come from that descendant. And I'm like sitting in Sunday school, like looking at my skin and like looking around, and me and my little sister are the only two people with any color, and I'm like, all of these things. So at that time, it was very, it built my identity that I had to deconstruct. But in the long term, it's actually been a gift, because I can enter into these environments, corporate world, nonprofit world, New Thought world, and feel very comfortable, relay a message in a way that can get to the spirit of the individual, and hopefully build a bridge in that authentic interaction, allow them to at least let down their guard a little bit to begin possibly dissolving some of those perceptions that may be based in that supremacy or racism that they don't even know is there.
Well, I think what's interesting too is, like, as I listen to you, like what you're describing as your approach is very much what I run into with a lot of people telling me that I'm doing it wrong. So it's weird for me, right? Because here you are saying that, yeah, that's my approach, is to disarm them and calmly approach them and get them to like take things and look at things and get them to shit and that kind of thing.
Well, Brian, if I went in there and I said like, look, this is racist, that would spread like fire, and I would not be able to go anywhere.
So, but in the same breath, you said that like the way that I do it is something that you value. And so I'm wondering like what your feeling is about the tension between the approach that you just described that you use, which I think is brilliant, and the approach that you see me using out in the world, and what's the tension there, but also what's the value there?
Well, I think that first and foremost, we're on different paths. So my path is more so like I speak at New Thought Centers, fairly frequently, but I also do a lot of work in corporate world. That's my majority of stuff. Your path, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you have a center, you're a minister, you're in the philosophy, or like in the teaching, so to say, and you have a platform that you've worked for to share that message. Your message can't be silenced. My message, trying to get into these different communities, and if I went with a very harsh approach that I feel is important, that would shut the door for a lot of things. But if I had a center and I was in your position, I would be able to speak in ways that could be a little bit more harsh, direct, and really bring up some very difficult things within people that then I could walk them through. But when I'm there just for a day, it's like, it's very short, and you have a platform that you can use your message, use your voice, use your center. Your community stands behind you. You have some incredible people in your community who are doing the work in alignment with you, or you in alignment with them. And I think that is something that is really, really beautiful.
Well, so let's pretend that we live in a world where my platform is your platform. Let's pretend for a second that we live in a world where, because I have the ability and have taken the time and energy and the slings and arrows to build this platform, that anybody that stands on my stage gets to fucking talk, and they can have the platform to do whatever the fuck they want to do with it. And that's why I chose to give it to them. And that once they leave that position or step off of that platform, that I'll be stepping back into it to make sure motherfuckers don't try to trip. So knowing that is kind of what's happening right now. If you could just say everything that you thought needed saying without having to worry about consequence, what would that sound like?
Man, that is a great question.
And
it's almost like in this, I would love to talk to, I should talk to some of my family and close Black friends, and to see like how much of what we do is based upon this subconscious idea of internalizing the consequences of what we're going to do. Yeah. Because you saying that, I think that is a way that I've operated always.
Well, and I don't want to like set you up to be harmed. So I'm not expecting you to disarm those things for my sake or for the sake of this platform, right? And if anything got said that you would like, I really don't want you to share that with the rest of the world, please don't. I wouldn't, which is why this is a pre-recorded discussion and not a live one. But just me personally, if you have, and I can't expect, this is part of my growth edge of white supremacy, is that I expect that I can talk to people the way that I talk to people and trying to shake them out of their white supremacy, because it's got truth behind it. And so they should just trust me. But I also represent white heterosexual maleness. Mm-hmm. And so like when I'm getting rough and rugged and yelling and screaming and raging on folks, like it resembles everything that's ever oppressed them. And so I used to get really offended when they would accuse me of like, well, you scare me, or I'm afraid of you, or I can't be honest with you. And I've come to a place where I understand that that's just part of the deal. And so I don't take it personally. And so I don't have that expectation of folks. Mm-hmm. However, it doesn't mean I don't ask motherfuckers to get real, because it's really real. Really, and so I'm wondering, for my own sake, even if it's just for me, but like if you could just say what you have to say without any filter whatsoever, and maybe the world never sees it. Maybe you and I are the only people that ever share it together, but I want to provide you a space to a white man that with absolutely zero possible fucking consequence whatsoever. What would you want to say about this issue and the way it's affected you in your life and what you think is important about it?
Man, I think that it's something that we probably both talk about, but it's racism is very real. It's the very foundation and bedrock that America has been built on. America would not be America without the backs of slaves. America would not be America without a genocide of the indigenous populations that scattered across this country and honored and cherished nature. To completely ignore that is to dismiss everything. I mean, you're living in like a fantasy land. And there are people who are still being impacted and affected because of that bedrock that we've built this country on. and it is a part of all of us. And if you're unwilling to actually recognize and acknowledge the racism, the supremacy, the oppression that is inherent within ourselves because of this incomplete education and limited Eurocentric viewpoint that has built our internal world, then you are actually the problem. And we all play into it at some piece. It's not just white folks, it's not just Black folks, it's all of us. Because Black folks, if we assume a role of inferiority, then we're automatically putting ourselves at a less advantage. If white people continuously see themselves as superior, they're always oppressing somebody. So there's all this inner work that has to occur in order for anything to take place. And it begins with the recognition that every system, every institution, everything here in America that you can think of is running rampant with racism and oppression. It just may not be KKK flag marching, Confederate flag waving, crosses in the front yard burning, but it is there. And if you look at any organization, I think like 2% of Fortune 500s have a Black person up top. And just saying that you are diverse does not mean that you have a white woman in place of a white man. That is not diversity. That's a small little segment of diversity, but that is missing the mark completely. And so for individuals to really recognize, to dismantle racism, you have to check your own racist tendencies, get very uncomfortable, look at the honest history of this country, and begin seeing things from an entirely different perspective, because there is somebody in your community who has a totally different experience than you, and you maybe not directly, but are indirectly adding to the oppression of that person or group of people.
I appreciate that. I think, as you can see, that like if this camera wasn't rolling, the way we had that conversation would have been different. And that's not a call out to you. That's a reminder to viewers that like there is no such thing as affording a Black person a safe space in our public spaces right now, because no matter how hard we try, there's systemic consequences of full-blown unadulterated Blackness is, in my opinion, absolutely unavoidable. And so it's something that you guys are constantly having to mitigate and manage, like when you choose to do so. And I think people expect you to do that. And I want to make it clear that I don't. And that I think that if a Black person wanted to get on here and rip my asshole open, like I would welcome them to fucking do that, right? Because at the end of the day, that unadulterated Black voice has literally been the greatest thing that our culture has lost and missed out on. Is the most authentic, truth-speaking, truth-saying Black voice that hip-hop, in my opinion, really gave me an opportunity to hear in ways that I otherwise would never have been able to hear. So I want to check time. How are we doing on time? How are you doing on time?
Maybe about 5 more minutes or so.
Okay, cool. So so with all that in mind, right, with everything that we've talked about, when you think about like where is one place that you think that if everybody took the time to take a look at it, that they would be able to find that really intimate internal starting point to do this work? It's a big question.
Man, this is where like I kind of have been getting hung up on, like everybody's asking, like not everybody, but a lot of people are asking me like, what do I do? Where do we
white
start?
folks, mad white people, what do I do?
And I'm like, I can point to things that you could do in the community, but that's not gonna change it. There are those lists going around on, the internet right now, like 75 things white people can do that are all behavioral centric, like, and they're important and they're valuable. But there has to be something that happens within. It almost has to be like this deep willingness and commitment to dismantling your own racist tendencies. And it's not saying that like you're a bad person. It's not saying that you are out there trying to go lynch somebody. Like, it's saying that you have to be willing to go into the dark realms of yourself with a light of conscious awareness and begin to illuminate areas within your own being that you have been unwilling to venture into throughout your experience, and start shining a light of conscious awareness and start working on that inside of yourself. Because otherwise, man, Okay, let's more equitable opportunity, put more Black people in power. Like Cornel West said, we've had, dark faces in high places. That's not changing the system. Like, that's just equitable opportunity, but you have to play by these rules. So, man, Brian, it's like something inside has to happen. And I don't know exactly what it is. I try to walk people through a process where they can begin, start resolving unconscious perceptions. But that's difficult to say if 95% of what we do is unconscious. People don't even know where to start with that. They're not going to admit oh, I get scared when I see a group of Black men walking towards me. That takes a willingness to be vulnerable. And so I don't know, man. It's like something has to happen within, and perhaps it's just.
You said, I don't know, but I think, and you said, I don't know a bunch of times, but I think you actually said something that I think was the most perfect answer.
How many times did I say, I don't know? Because I don't know how many times.
Yeah, bro, I don't know either, bro. Neither of us know. Collectively, we know, and there's a divine thing in this universe that is working for our highest good that knows. And I think what I heard you say that really, through everything that you said right there, that was oh shit, that's the thing that people really need to key in on, is a willingness to be vulnerable. Because when I've been doing this work, what I've realized is the depth of fear when I'm standing in a room full of Black folks and I just let my ignorance hang out, right? And knowing that I'm saying stupid shit and that I'm doing dumb shit, and welcoming the correction, welcoming the learning opportunity, and not defending or denying or trying to make if I need to soothe the fact that my ego is hurt because I said some dumb shit and a Black person turns to me and goes, you know what you just said was fucking racist, and in fact this is really a Black space, so I need you to shut the fuck up right now. My vulnerability to not have a voice in that room is important, and it's part of my growth edge, right? Because I'm a talker. I talk shit, I talk a lot, and my voice is because I take up a shit ton of space, right? But really to shut up and to just know that I'm well cared for in a large group of Black folks in a power-driven systemic conversation, shows me that vulnerability is where the real work gets done. That vulnerability is where every other answer that I don't understand begins to finally reveal itself to me. I don't know. Would you agree with that? I think that's.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so maybe we can invite people to be willing to be vulnerable, and be willing to be vulnerable with yourself and identify things that you do, have done, are doing in this moment that are
harmful.
And fueling
bullshit.
Systemic racism that we're looking to dismantle. Yeah. You're either working towards dismantling it, or the act of doing nothing is reinforcing what is currently existing. So if you say, I'm not doing anything wrong, you're actually reinforcing the current system that is existing. You can't be neutral here.
Yeah, there's no middle ground. There just isn't. But Jeffon, first off, I think you know this already, but damn, I love you, bro.
I really appreciate your willingness to do this, man.
Yeah, man. And we might do this a few more times. I think people would be interested to hear more from your perspective. I think I'm going to I already have some more of these that are going to be happening with some other people that I think are important voices to be heard. And so, this is It's Really Real. And these conversations are really about getting to the meat of what the actuality is, and just knowing that we might make a bunch of mistakes along the way, and being welcome and willing to receive all of the correction necessary to continue to sharpen who I am and who the people that enjoy this project are, and what we're trying to learn together, and who we're trying to be in the world, and to welcome that, and to do it rough and tumble, and to fight around about it and scrap, but to accept our L's when we L, and to use those losses to improve who we are and to become better at being a living reflection of who it is that we believe ourselves to be in the world. And so I think you are a magnificent reflection of that. I am so grateful to have you here. And Thanks, do me a favor, tell these people where they can find you.
Yes. Jeffon Seeley. I think I'm the only Jeffon Seeley in the world. So if you type that into Google, I'm there.
I spell it.
Yeah. Just type in Jeffon Seeley. If you can spell it right, then you'll find me.
Cool. I appreciate you taking the time today. I want to make sure that you have the last word before we bounce out. So last words, anything that you want to say that you feel like is important to speak to the audience, and then we'll call it a wrap for the day.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that saying that I shared a little earlier. Authentic human interaction is the greatest means to invalidate unconscious perceptions that have no basis in experiential reality. Authentically engage with people who are totally different than you, and in doing so, you begin to invalidate those biases that you move around with that are not based in experiential reality. And it's through authentic interaction that we collectively can come together and recognize that we're moving towards something great. But as long as we're segmented in silos, it's very easy for the system that we're in to continue to flourish. So we have great work to do, and let's continue with it.
And so it is.
And so it is.
Amen, brother. Thank you so much. I love you. I appreciate you. What up? Reverend Brian here again. And this is the end of the video where I ask you, if you like this content, like and share it. And if you subscribe to it, that would be amazing. And most importantly, if you want to be notified every time I upload a new video, just click that bell and YouTube will make sure that you never miss a single one. Thank you so much for supporting my work. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And I'm just knowing that something amazing is unfolding in your life right now. Peace. All right, what up? This is my main motherfucker. No, just kidding. I'm going to edit this. Don't forget, I'm going to edit. Okay.
No edits, man.
Yeah, no edits. Don't. You just wait. Just wait. This is going to edit.
Just edit the blooper. Just edit the blooper reel.